That leads us right into our on-campus portion of the broadcast today, which is brought to you by East Texas Baptist University. ETBU combines strong academics, championship-level athletics, and a Christ-centered mission that influences every part of campus life. If you're searching for a university where faith, competition, and community matter, discover Life on the Hill in Marshall, Texas. Visit etbu.edu to learn more. Okay, let's get right to it. As we have promised for the last week or so, Matt is going to reveal his first men's tournament bracket as far as he sees it from his bracketology, and he has delivered, as we've said. I know we worked all day Saturday and well into the night on Sunday as well. Of course, NCAA Selection Sunday is coming up this Sunday, and while there some questions have been decided rather decisively, I know there are many still up in the air. A lot of questions heading into championship week, which will answer some of those. But especially, man, as you've mentioned, this is one of the softest bubbles that we've seen in recent years.
Yeah.
Give us some clarity with your bracket on all of this early madness.
Well, and if you'll do me a favor, tell me what I know as we go along. You're going to throw up some graphics with stuff. So just let me know what you're putting up, because you're the one putting that up, so I can kind of speak to it.
We're going to go left to right as we're seeing it in our document, which I believe is the East bracket. So just throw that one up there first and tell us what you think about that, how you got to that, and then we'll just go south, Midwest, and West.
Okay, so the East bracket, Duke right now is the overall #1 seed, and I want to be clear, this is a razor thin margin between them and Michigan. Duke and Michigan both are really neck and neck, and if Michigan wins the Big Ten tournament, Michigan may very well overtake Duke for the #1 seed. Overall, they're both going to be #1s, but so we start in the East bracket, and that's where Duke's going to go. If you don't know how the brackets work, there's an East, there's a South, there's a Midwest, and a West. And so right now, with the way the #1 seeds have fallen, Duke's going to be in the East, Michigan's going to be in the Midwest, Arizona's going to be out West, Florida, who is new to the #1 seed line, is going to be in the South. But looking at this East bracket, what stands out to me, and you'll notice this, I've kind of, you and I've talked about this kind of back and forth, but Arkansas and Kansas have flip-flopped 4 and 5 seeds in my bracket. Margins are really razor thin on some of these 3, 4, and 5 setups. There's teams like Alabama, Virginia, Purdue, Texas Tech that are kind of 3, 4, maybe, I don't know. And then there's teams like Arkansas, Kansas, Vanderbilt that are maybe 4 or 5. So it's kind of making your best projection. I went with Arkansas, not because they're my favorite, but because a road win over Missouri without your All-American was pretty impressive to me. And so they are the 4. But what you see here is there's a location you'll see. For example, Duke is going to get the winner of Howard and Lehigh, and then Utah State and Georgia are going to play, and those games are going to take place in Greenville, South Carolina. And it's not until you get to the Sweet 16, which is kind of the light green and then moving into the yellow, that you'll go out to Washington, D.C. for the regional. So Duke will be with Georgia and Utah State in Greenville. Kansas and Arkansas will be in Oklahoma City, and you see their matchups there. High Point and Utah Valley are pretty high level 12 and 13s. Those are going to be tough ones. They have not clinched yet. High Point is in their conference championship. Utah Valley, I don't think their conference championship has begun yet. So we will see. In St. Louis, boy, I thought this one was fascinating. Iowa State, Wisconsin, and Missouri all playing in St. Louis. You want to talk about some fans that are going to be there. I think that would be really interesting. And then kind of the same way down there in the last one with Michigan State and Villanova potentially meeting in the second round in Buffalo, New York. But one team to kind of note there, Central Florida as a 10 seed. Central Florida's in a bit of a free fall. They lost their last 3 games, none of them to top teams in the Big 12. So I think they're safe, but they would do well not to bow out in the first round of their conference tournament. The same can be said for Missouri, the 11 seed there.
I want to speak about Kansas here for just a second. You know, we have kind of gone back the last couple of weeks, you and I, me in particular, kind of being out on them. I did speak to my Kansas source yesterday after church, and he's not worried about them per se. He's just really frustrated, as he says most Kansas fans are, because those folks know basketball, right?
Yeah.
They do know basketball, and I'll give him that. He says that the general consensus and why it's so frustrating for them is that they feel like they have a team that is a Final Four team.
Yeah.
That has vastly underperformed all season long. And I've gone back and forth as to why those reasons are, but he assured me that they would not lose their first round game. He's looking more toward the round of 32, Sweet 16. If they're going to get tripped up, that's when it's going to happen. He says, but watch out if they get past that. Because they do have the talent. I think we understand they do have the talent to go and be as good as anybody in the country, just haven't shown it consistently this year. So that's just a little, picking that up a little bit from our discussion last week on our worries about Kansas. But I think I agree with you. I think you have them in the perfect spot. I think they're a 5 seed.
And it would be curious if this bracket was correct and it was Arkansas and Kansas potentially meeting in the second round, because last year they met in the first round. Arkansas won. 3 years ago, I believe it was, Arkansas was the 8 and Kansas was the 1, and they met in the second round and Arkansas upset them. Not only that, last year Kansas's season ended in Fayetteville at the Arkansas Regional in baseball. And about 4 years ago, we met in a bowl game in football, and Arkansas beat Kansas in overtime. I don't know that Kansas is really interested in playing Arkansas in the postseason. It's just kind of a funny thing how it's worked out of late. But anyway, that would be, Arkansas and Kansas meeting in Oklahoma City, that would be wild.
Yes. Yeah. That would be one of those you really would want to be in attendance for if you could get a ticket. I don't think you could get a ticket.
Yeah.
But anyway, okay, good stuff there on the East. That is your prediction as we stand here on Monday. And again, I believe Matt has said that you will be looking to update this or tweaking it somewhat as the week goes on, to where when we get to Sunday, we'll see if you match exactly or get pretty close to what the actual bracket looks like. But good work there on the East. Let's move on to the South, where I see you have Florida as your number 1 seed. So you have elevated the Gators from the SEC into that number 1 seed.
Yeah. Rough loss for UConn against a pretty bad Marquette team. And Florida took care of business in Rupp Arena. Florida is rocket hot right now. I mean, they are just so good. So they get upgraded to the number 1. Connecticut falls down to the number 2. And in fact, I had to make a late tweak on this because I actually would rate Houston as my top number 2, but I had to double check the rules, and I still need to. I don't think Houston can be the 2 in the South because the regional is in Houston. And I think technically they're the host of that regional. Every location has a quote unquote school host. So I'd have to double check that, but Connecticut's the 2 here. Notable things here. You see Florida will get to play in Tampa, Florida. UCLA is really hot. They're an 8. I elevated Miami of Ohio to a 9. And so you see that here. I don't know that they'll get a 9. I feel like they might be more likely a 10. We'll have to see how they do in the MAC tournament. I also don't know that the committee will want to put them to where a number 1 seed has to play an undefeated team potentially in the second round. I think that could be a little odd, but that's just where they fell. But UCLA is hot right now. Virginia.
Are you giving them? I'm assuming you're giving them the automatic bid from the MAC here.
Yeah. That the assumption there is that they will be the automatic bid. Now, I do believe Miami of Ohio has done enough that if they do not win the MAC tournament, they will still get in, which means we've got, and we can talk about this a little bit later, we've got a bid thief. somebody on the bubble is going to get bumped because Miami of Ohio is going to stay in and the MAC champion will move in. But that's going on in Tampa, in Greenville, South Carolina. And this was funny how it fell. Virginia versus Liberty. I mean, that's an in-state battle right there taking place in South Carolina, and then also St. John's there. Oddly enough, St. John's is the regular season Big East champion. Don't know if you knew that. They moved past Connecticut with what happened there. Moving on to Portland, where Nebraska takes on Wright State. That's the 3 seed. And then how about the battle for your Longhorns against the Tar Heels?
That's a tough draw.
It is number 6 versus number 11. Texas, rough loss at home against Oklahoma. You know, the loss to Arkansas on Wednesday didn't really hurt Texas. I don't think anybody expected that going into Fayetteville, but that loss was rough. They would do well. I believe they open with, is it Ole Miss that Texas opens with?
To play Ole Miss Wednesday.
Yeah. They would do well not to lose that one. I think if they win that one, they're probably okay no matter what happens with Georgia in the second.
They've actually got the easy by that loss. They've actually got the easier bracket. The way it lines up to get to at least the semifinals. Before they would have to even consider, I think, seeing Florida. They may not see Florida until the finals if they were to get there. But
right, yeah, they would have to navigate Georgia and Alabama to get to the semis, assuming they beat Ole Miss. And then down in Philadelphia, you've got Connecticut, you've got Miami and Ohio State, a 7-10 battle there. Connecticut playing Queens, and I don't know if you saw this, but Queens College yesterday defeated Central Arkansas, University of Central Arkansas, in a great overtime game between two teams who've never been to the tournament. And Central Arkansas had a young man, Cameron Hunter, who scored the final 20 points of the game for UCA. Finished regulation with 43, finished the game with like 46 or 48, but Queens came up with the victory. So that's their first ever tournament bid. Congrats to them. And I've got them going to play UConn in Philadelphia. But that is your South bracket. And the winner of this bracket will match up with the winner of the East bracket in the Final Four.
Right, moving on to the Midwest.
Midwest bracket. Here's your Michigan Wolverines. And it's funny, Michigan is geographically closer to Buffalo for their host site, but I have heard from some pretty reputable sources that Michigan wants to play in Philadelphia. And when you're one of the top teams overall, you're probably going to get what you want. So that's why I have that there. Clemson and TCU are the 8-9. This is where we got Texas Tech as a 4 and Vanderbilt as a 5. And you'll notice that the way it sort of fell, Texas Tech and Stephen F. Austin, if they win the Southland, that would be an interesting battle there. Also, Northern Iowa came out of the Missouri Valley. That was where we had Belmont, who was kind of shocked in the first round of the Missouri Valley. Northern Iowa, that might be a little bit of a nightmare memory from you from the last time they were in the tournament. Beat Texas on a half-court shot at the buzzer. It was a wild game, crazy game. Out in Portland, Gonzaga and BYU, formerly in the same conference, potentially on a crash course. We see our first matchup of the Final Four to get in, Virginia Commonwealth and SMU battling in a play-in game for the right to play BYU. Gonzaga, a tough 14 seed, North Dakota State, not far from Portland out there. That would be an interesting one. And then, we talked about Arkansas and Kansas both being in Oklahoma City. Well, look at that. How about Kentucky and Houston? Oklahoma City could have Arkansas, Kansas, Kentucky, and Houston in the same regional, not the same regional, but the same in the same location. Boy, that would be a hard ticket to find right there if those 4 teams end up going there.
Absolutely. And I'm looking at this regional final here, which potentially could be Houston against Michigan in Chicago. I'd pay money to watch that.
Yeah. That would be really
It's a pay-per-view kind of game. Okay. Looks good there on your Midwest bracket. And again, I'm fascinated with a couple of teams here that I'm going to be watching in my own personal bracket, no matter where they land, and that's Houston and Florida. That's the ones
Yep.
I'm going to be watching and probably putting all my eggs in those two baskets for the most part, unless something crazy happens this week. All right, let's close it out here with the West bracket.
All right, West bracket. That's where Arizona is, number one, the Big 12 champs. Arizona has been, I mean, really, over the course of the whole season, it's Duke, Michigan, and Arizona. Those are the three beasts. Now, Florida has probably inserted themselves into that conversation after some early hiccups, including losses to Arizona and UConn. But Arizona has been just lights out. They'll be out in San Diego. Iowa and St. Louis are the 8-9 potential matchup there. Out in Buffalo, you got Purdue, who is I don't know what to do with Purdue. I could see them as a 3. Their metrics are still really good, but they just keep accumulating losses. Do you know Purdue is the 7 seed in the Big Ten tournament? It's kind of hard to believe, but I got them as a 4. Tennessee up there. Boy, Tennessee drawing Yale. I tell you, every 5 seed just hopes they get the Ivy League school, right? That's always scary. Here was one, and
Rick Barnes special waiting to happen right there.
For sure. This is where I kind of take a stab. I just did a little bit of a deep dive this week into Alabama, and I bumped them up to a 3. Alabama, and that may not be correct. I don't know for sure, but I was looking at Alabama's resume. They're the number 2 seed in the SEC. They went 13-5. But I just kind of wanted to share with you a little bit. I don't know if you were aware of Alabama's non-conference schedule. They beat St. John's. They lost to Purdue. They beat Illinois. They lost to Gonzaga. They also beat Clemson. They lost to Arizona. They beat South Florida, who is the class of the American Conference. They beat Yale by 24 points, who we just said is the class of the Ivy League. That's a really good non-conference schedule, and they really got a lot of wins there. So I bumped Alabama up to the 3. Interesting matchup there with Louisville as the 6. You notice here's my other play-in, the first 4 games. Santa Clara, who got a win last night against Indiana, who's holding on for dear life. And then down in St. Louis, Illinois, the 2 seed. They'll love playing in St. Louis. And they'll be joined by St. Mary's and Texas A&M in the 7-10. Texas A&M avoided the dark side of the bubble by the skin of their teeth in a triple overtime win over LSU. But at 11-7 in the SEC, I feel pretty safe about Texas A&M. But that means that out there in St. Louis, you could potentially have Iowa State, Wisconsin, Missouri, and Illinois all out there in St. Louis. That's another hot ticket right there. But that's kind of where we are. Excuse me. It's kind of where we are on the West bracket. And one thing to note, I mentioned that Santa Clara is one of the last ones in. They got a win last night, which now sets it up to where the West Coast Conference semifinals, which I believe may be tonight. I'm bringing that up right now. The West Coast Conference, the semifinals are tonight. It's Oregon State, Gonzaga, and Santa Clara and St. Mary's. Why is that important? As long as Oregon State doesn't win that tournament, you avoid a bid thief. And that's what's really important there. So Santa Clara defeated a bid thief last night. As long as Oregon State doesn't win that, bubble teams can breathe a little bit easier, because right now Santa Clara, St. Mary's, and Gonzaga all are would-be tournament teams.
All right. Well, that's good stuff, brother. And again, these things could change based on, I know there's a few of these teams that could go up or down a little bit based on their performances in their conference tournaments. I'll be fascinated to see ultimately who ends up being the number 1 seed. I agree with you there. It's a race right now between Duke and Michigan. Michigan, I mean, probably, would you agree, has the tougher road in the Big Ten tournament, just in terms of overall talent?
Yeah. There's no question about that. In fact, I feel
So
like
I guess we could probably see maybe even if Duke wins the ACC, Michigan could run the table in the Big Ten and jump them, right?
I mean, I think that's very, very possible. I'm curious to see that. I'm also really curious, and let me ask you: are you able to bring up that tab, the bubble tab?
Yes.
If you'll bring that up, because this is kind of my best guess, my stab at, you know, where we are on the bubble. And so you see, in my take, if you're a 9 seed right now, you're safe. You're not going to be eliminated no matter what happens. And probably if you're a 10 seed. So if you look at that bubble tab, I think Miami of Ohio and Texas A&M are definitely safe. I think NC State and Central Florida are reasonably safe, but it would be good to not mess around. But you see, you start wondering who are the teams that could work their way in, and the first four out, they're labeled, their seed there's labeled FFO. You see Auburn, Cincinnati, New Mexico, and San Diego State. Those are the teams that I'm really watching closely. Some teams that had some significant wins though over the weekend. West Virginia, Stanford, and Oklahoma had some really, really big wins. Now, look, it's not enough to just launch them in because Oklahoma beat Texas or West Virginia beat Central Florida or Stanford beat North Carolina State. But it's enough to in a soft bubble where teams just keep saying, we don't really want to get in. We're going to keep losing. It's enough to say, hey, if we can get hot and win a couple in a row, watch out for us. So this is, to me, the most fascinating part of this is how teams play on the bubble getting into conference tournament action. So that's just a little bit of a picture there of who's still alive and who's trying to hang on for dear life.
Yeah, and you mentioned Oklahoma. That was a big win for them, of course, on the road Saturday against my Horns. And I was really feeling good about Texas being a kind of a sleeper team, maybe that no one would want to see going into the tournament. Now, I'm based off of Sean Miller's comments after that game. I'm not so sure he even believes it. It's just kind of a, defensively they're a mess, and it's too late in the season. You really can't fix something like that. I mean, that's a team problem. And so he's just he needs another recruiting class or two to be able to kind of get what he wants in there. So who knows? I mean, they've shown they can play and beat anybody, but they've also shown that they can be upset on their own home floor when they need to win.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, so, very big question mark for Texas going into that. And I agree. Oklahoma has put itself at least in consideration for those first four teams that, I don't know if you call them first four, last four that make it in for the playoffs. So, but anyway, good stuff there again. And again, we'll probably around Thursday or so, I'm guessing you'll be able to maybe update this or let us know if there's been any massive changes to the bracket. But I would put this up against anybody's right now. I mean, based on your methodology, I think it's right on point.
Well, and I think we can take, and not that I want to do a full breakdown every day, but I think if there's like tonight, there may be some shifts, there's going to be some new teams that clinch a spot. And if you notice on the S curve, I added a nice bright green color code for those teams are now in. They're no longer my prediction to get in or who's leading their conference. Those teams have secured their spot.
Good deal. Good deal. Let's switch over to the women's part of the NCAA tournament coming up. They do have March Madness as well. And, of course, their conference tournaments ended over the weekend pretty much all across the country. Very few, what I would say, big-time upsets, at least at the higher levels. You did have some mild ones between some lower-ranked teams knocking off some higher-ranked teams, particularly in the Big 12, West Virginia beating TCU. In the Big 12 championship game. So, but they were really only separated by a game in the standings. That's really not that big of an upset to me. Also a mild upset here. Number 13, Duke knocks off number 12, Louisville in the ACC tournament final. But other than that, I mean, Matt, it's pretty, it's the ladies pretty much held serve going, really with their bracketology, if you compare it there, although the bracketology, nothing's really changed much other than my Texas Lady Horns, of course, just really racing past South Carolina. This game really wasn't as close even as the final 17-point margin made it look to be. The Horns jumped out from the opening tip, ran out a 27-12 advantage in the first quarter, and never looked back. Very impressive win for Texas there in the SEC final. And so, of course, that is my backdrop here today. Not technically, we're not in a press box here, but man, when the Horns win a conference championship, you have to light the tower. So we have the tower lit behind us here, of course. Beautiful sight as always. So again, the ladies now pretty much take a week off, and their bracket will be released on a Sunday as well. Really the only change that you can see if you look at bracketology is that Texas has jumped South Carolina and taken that all-important 3 seed, which means that they can really take care of business in Austin and then have the regional final, semifinals, and Elite 8 there in Fort Worth. So would never have to leave the state of Texas to get to the Final Four. That's a huge advantage for Texas potentially.
Yeah, that would be really, really good. Really impressive tournament. I mean, we've talked about the depth and the high level of basketball in the SEC for a good bit on this podcast. So really impressive tournament win there. And you're right, it's kind of weird. We mostly have little conferences left to fill it in. Most of the big conferences are done. Really great ACC final yesterday between Louisville and Duke. Or I can't remember if it was Saturday or yesterday, but one thing of note, there are some games today. The Big East final is this evening, UConn and Villanova. Best of luck, Villanova. Villanova, really good year. They're 25-6. But kind of an underrated conference final tonight at 5:00 in the Metro Atlantic Athletic Conference. Fairfield and Quinnipiac. Fairfield's number 25 in the nation, and we've looked at bracketology, they appear on the first 4 out or next 4 out a lot. This is a battle of 2 teams that are 27-4 and 26-5 in the Metro Atlantic Athletic Conference. And we talked a little bit about tournament expansion last week, and of course my whole thing on it is, if we're going to expand it, I want it to where Fairfield and Quinnipiac both get in, not just one of them. When you do that well, I think I don't know. To have 2 teams that have combined for 53 wins playing in a conference final this evening, and it's not out of the SEC or the ACC or some big conference like that. I just think that's pretty cool, and it's an underrated matchup. But just wanted to make mention of that.
Yeah, and I was looking at bracketology here, which was updated last night, so it's pretty much up to the minute. They have Texas, of course, in Region 3, which is the Fort Worth region. Interestingly enough, they have Oklahoma as the 4 seed in that same region. So technically, the Sooners and the Horns could meet in the Elite 8. They're in Fort Worth. So that would be kind of like a Red River rivalry type thing right there in Fort Worth, Texas and Oklahoma, right? So
for sure,
be an interesting matchup if those 2 teams advance. But yes, the women's basketball is winding down as well and gearing up for March Madness next week. Okay, just wanted to, before we close out our on-campus section here today, wanted to kind of review some action going on at ETBU. Of course, ETBU is, again, our sponsor of this segment of the podcast. They had a big weekend out in Georgia for ETBU softball. They go out there, of course, and come home with a 12-2 overall mark. Took a couple of losses there, including a big one on Sunday to top-ranked Trine there. That Tigers are down 3-0 going into the 5th inning, scored 3 in the top of the 5th, and then watched as Trine took control of the game there with a big uprising in the 5th inning and multi-run there. I believe they scored 6 runs in the 5th, and came away with a 9-4 win. But ETBU leaves that tournament with a overall 4-2 mark in the three-day tournament.
Yeah, and I feel like you have to feel good about that. I mean, it really was one bad inning, which that happens in baseball and softball. You know, the first day they battled two teams who were basically in the backyard of that tournament, two Georgia teams with Emory and Barry. They were number 13 and number 23, and you come out with a split there. I feel like you got to feel good about that. And the three teams they played that were not ranked, they did what you would want to see them do. First of all, they're not ranked, but let's not kid ourselves. These are nationally reputable programs, even if they weren't ranked. You don't get invited to this tournament in Georgia without being a nationally reputable program. And ETBU boat raced all three of those teams. So
Yes.
I thought there's no reason to look at a 4-2 week and think anything other than that was a good weekend for ETBU softball.
On the baseball side, the Tigers went up to Oregon and took 2 out of 3 from Pacific Oregon up there, despite you talk about a heartbreaking loss on Friday. You go and look at the box score of this one. So the game was scoreless going into the 6th inning. ETBU jumps out to a 1-0 lead in the 6th. Then Pacific turns around, takes a lead in the bottom of the 6th to go up 2-2. Tigers tie it up in the top of the 7th. So we're tied at 2 going into the 8th inning. ETBU takes a 3-2 lead in the top of the 8th. Pacific jumps them, and so they go up 4-3 in the bottom of the 8th. And then the 9th inning happened. Tigers put up 4 to go up 7-4 in that one, go into the bottom of the 9th. And what does Pacific do? They answer with 4 as well, come away with an 8-7 win over ETBU in the opener of that series on Friday night. What a wild game that took place up there. But, you know, ETBU jumps back on Saturday. And again, we've all been there. If you've ever been associated with a baseball team that loses a tough one like that, you can really tell the mettle of your team in the game coming up after that. And sometimes it's really good to have that game coming up and kind of wash that out. Well, they did exactly. They took a 17-4 win and kind of avenged that loss, and then followed that up with a 10-7 win in the nightcap on Saturday to get out of there by winning 2 out of 3. So that was a big road trip series win for Coach Jared Hood and his Tigers. They improved to 9-6 in the season.
I texted associate head coach Tanner Matthews afterward. I was like, man, that's a gutsy performance. The Friday night game was, I don't know, I was keeping up with it play by play, and both teams, I mean, Pacific had to feel horrible about their top of the 9th because I felt like they sort of, to an extent, gifted ETBU some of those runs, which, hey, I didn't care. I was rooting for the Tigers, so I didn't care. And then Pacific turns around and scores 4 in the bottom of the 9th. They only had 1 hit in that inning. There were a lot of walks. There were a lot of passed balls. So, you know, you really felt like, if you're the Tigers, you felt like you gave one away, and to respond the way they did. And let's be clear about it. That win on Saturday night was an extra inning win, the one that clinched the series. They had to rally to get it to extra innings and then scored 3 in the top of the 10th. So I just thought that was a really impressive performance. And I texted that to Coach Matthews, and he said, thank you. He goes, I really think we might have turned a corner. I felt like that's a good weekend. Pacific's a good program out there in Oregon. I thought that was, to walk away with 2 out of 3, you got to feel good about that.
I always like to hear when your coach says, I think we turned a corner. They see something that they were looking for, and they saw it. And it always portends usually that your team is definitely they've turned the corner, right? They're heading in the right direction. So good stuff there for ETBU all around on baseball and softball over the weekend. Once again, I want to thank East Texas Baptist University for sponsoring our on-campus segment here every day on the Right Team podcast from the Press Box.